submissions to for this conference, the abstracts that were submitted. A set of them sort of fell together as those addressing policy, program, and practice in the menstrual health space. In other words, taking the evidence and leveraging it to create some kind of change, to produce some kind of meaningful and substantive intervention. So we wanted to end the day with a conversation with these lovely folks who are all doing really interesting and innovative things to make menstruation matter and to improve quality of life for menstruators in a variety of contexts. So I will be your humble moderator and time tyrant. We wanted to keep this lively. We recognize that it's the end of the day and you have given one another your attention. So I've asked our panelists to respond to 3 questions for 2 minutes each. So we'll keep things going and then we'll have time for your responses. So I'm going to introduce each of them now, and then I will remind them of the first question, give them each an opportunity to respond. And I think we'll just go in order of the introductions. Pay attention to where you are in the introduction queue. Okay, so let me introduce our esteemed panelists. So Marcy Karen, Marcy, make yourself known, everybody, is the Jack and Lovell Olender Professor of Law and Director of Legislation and Civil Rights of the Legislation and Civil Rights Clinic at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law. Oh my God, that's the longest title of anyone I've ever met. Congratulations. Professor Karen supervises clinic work that lifts vulnerable populations out of poverty with better economic security and workplace protections, and she teaches and writes about access to other civil rights, civil justice for the military community, and women's legal history. Her most recent work has focused on improving federal and local public policy for menstruating individuals, breastfeeding workers, the military community, victims of domestic violence, and workers with disabilities. Welcome, Marcy. Vanessa Zaburls is the co-founder of BU Period, an NGO. Vanessa received her MBA from Holt International Business School in 2016 and founded BU Period. PBC, what is PBC?
Public Benefit Corporation.
Okay, thank you. It is an early stage startup in menstrual health that will provide innovative products and educational services for women and young girls. Vanessa founded BU Period to help women who are, like her, plagued with uterine fibroids and deserve a better menstrual health experience. Do I get an amen? So welcome. Caitlin Brewer, over here on the end, is a program manager here at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, where she supports the Gender, Adolescent Transitions and Environment, or GATE program, based in the Department of Socio-Medical Sciences. Prior to joining Columbia, she worked at Plan International USA, leading initiatives related to the integration of menstrual hygiene, management, water, sanitation, and nutrition. Welcome, Caitlin. Emily, I'm going to do it wrong. Hoppus, I did it right, oh good. Has been working as an advocate for girls' education and adolescent health for 7 years, most recently as Peru International's Programs and Partnerships Consultant. Peru, if you do not know, is an international nonprofit based here in New York and Nairobi that produces and distributes high-quality menstrual supplies in conjunction with reproductive health education. She recently returned to the U.S. from Nairobi, where she was working with Peru to establish and strengthen its programs and health curriculum for out-of-school young women and underserved population. Go, Emily. Welcome, Emily. And finally, Laura Strassfeld, to my immediate left. Laura is co-founding of the first commercial all-natural perfume company in the 1990s. That is a fact, right? I did not know about you.
I didn't know that you had this flyer.
I do. Oh, This is one story about Laura. Gave her firsthand, it's a good story though, gave her firsthand knowledge of the lax regulation of personal care products. Can I get an amen? Amen. Yeah, she has done extensive research on environmental toxins in women's health and has written spoken publicly about menstrual product safety. She co-founded the law and policy nonprofit Period Equity with Jennifer Weiss-Wolf, who many of us know, in 2016 after they helped mobilize legal action against New York State to remove its sales tax on menstrual products. And behind us is Laura's work. Her fingerprints are all over this, and we're going to hear about that in a little bit. All right, so those are our panelists who are ready for a wild ride. So the first question I pose to each of you, beginning with Marcy, is, could you please, in your most pithy and engaging way possible, summarize your major policy, practice, or programming intervention? We want what you've accomplished, what's underway. 2 minutes, go.
Sure. So law professors are notoriously short and pithy, so embedded in that really long title were a bunch of roles. Wearing one of my hats, I teach a variety of courses on gender and employment law, where I have actually integrated menstruation into my courses this semester. Wearing a second hat, I direct the Legislation and Civil Rights Clinic. In that clinic, I teach law students how to be legislative lawyers that operate at the intersection of text, law, policy, and politics. And I do that with my students by representing nonprofit and community-based groups on systemic reform issues in the district, on the local level, and on the national level. We work on issues that improve the lives of vulnerable residents, and from 2016 to very recently, we represented a nonprofit called ROS, bringing resources to aid women's shelters and help them remove and then fund the repeal of the tampon tax in Virginia to get it, in the district, to reduce it in Virginia, and then to help build the case on a national level by hosting the first congressional briefing that highlighted the needs of menstruators in their own words to have access in schools, in shelters, and in places where women are detained. Then my students contextualize those stories and put it in public policy format by this. I'm creating this report. For those of you online, you can find this report by following me on Twitter. It's my pinned tweet at Professor MK. So in wearing the hat of being a lawyer with my students, I've worked in this space, and I'm thrilled that we were able to successfully remove the tampon tax in DC and to fight back on the need to actually implement the tax by getting it funded and then to really build a case on a national level. But in my third hat, in that really long title, I'm also an academic working on my own scholarship. And that scholarship right now is about periods in workplace policy, in which I propose an expansion of federal employment law to normalize and destigmatize menstrual management at work in ways that really address the mismatch between the traditional structures of workplaces and the needs of menstruating workers, and stay tuned for more.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks, Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. I founded Be Period after I was challenged to come up with a social impact idea at grad school. And they said you can write up a social impact idea, innovation, or product or service for Johnson & Johnson, or you can do one for yourself. And so at that time, I remembered that I had put away some sketches of a pad that I drew after having my myomectomy surgery in 2015. And I said, I'm just going to do what I originally started to do, which was to help women who were like me, who were plagued with uterine fibroids, better manage their menstrual health. And so that challenge ended up in an executive summary, and that executive summary got a pass. And then from there, I went on a journey to Kenya and India and the Middle East, and I was one of 10 Americans in my grad school, and I had got like over 150 surveys from women from all over the world at my school, and traveling to find out that there was a common denominator amongst menstrual health management globally, and it was that common denominator was lack. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to move forward with Be Period. And I said, but these products kind of sell themselves, although I am creating a smart pad so that the pad will be biodegradable, of course, be smart in shape and design, but the novelty will be in the fact that you give bioinformatics back to the end user to help them communicate what's going on with their bodies. The service that I do is I actually do menstrual health practices for young girls ages 7 to 17, and I started this past year, and it's been really, really I don't have the words to describe how fulfilling that it's been to share information and knowledge, specifically with young girls of color who aren't aware that 1 out of 3 of them will be diagnosed with either thyroids and the boys that are in schools as well. They want to know what they can do to assist. So it's a great satisfaction to be on that end and provide that service. And in 2020, my goal is to expand on these workshops as I develop R&D for the Smart Panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Caitlin.
Hi. So as Chris mentioned, I work at Columbia's Public Health School on a small research team. We look at a number of issues around menstruation worldwide, particularly in the Global South. Sorry. And so just one initiative that we have been working on this year has been looking at the issue of how do we monitor menstrual health and hygiene. So as this issue kind of gains popularity and there are more policies, more interventions, more programs happening around it, how do we measure impact? How do we make sure that what we're doing is making progress, and how do we share that progress with other people? Particularly with, I think everyone in this room would agree that menstrual-related issues are very cross-cutting issues in global health and development. They have implications for sexual and reproductive health, psychosocial health, water and sanitation, education, etc. But those sectors don't always buy in yet to the importance of working on this issue and engaging around it. So it's kind of one attempt to further conversations around this. We brought together a multi-sectoral group of researchers, policymakers, government officials, implementers, and monitoring and evaluation specialists, and convened a small expert meeting in March of this year to talk through, to look at what existing measures are there for menstruation. Are they validated? Are they rigorous? How are we measuring these issues? And then to identify gaps where we as, menstrual researchers know that there's interesting work going on, but we don't necessarily have indicators to measure that. And then also to look at how these measurements for menstrual-related issues align with the key indicators that people are looking in other priority areas in global health and in development. Because as we try to further engage them, it's really important that we can show how our work is relevant to what they're doing. Everyone has limited resources, and so if we can't show that what we're doing is going to help them achieve their goals, we're much less likely to get them on board. So we had a really great meeting with 30 participants, as well as a global advisory group of about 75 people, which led to a green paper looking at some key indicators that do exist, and then looking also at areas of alignment across those 5 priority areas. And it's been really great. The green paper has been published. We're getting really good buy-in from a lot of different sectors, but just really trying to push forward this notion of how do we make sure that we're making impact, and also how do we try to have some consistency across the way that we're measuring and talking about these programs and interventions.
Emily.
Thank you. So before I start, I just want to mention that everything I say here has been learned from my Kenyan colleagues. Everything I say is what I learned from them, and so I wish they could be here, but I'm here. So through international works, mostly in Kenya and Tanzania, a little bit in Uganda, to provide menstrual products, but also to provide education. And we've been working in that space for 10 years now. And the way we see it is menstrual education and menstrual products. This is our product. It's a reusable sanitary pad. If you'd like to come see it afterwards, you can. It's locally made in Nairobi, Kenya. And so we employ women there to make it. But we really see this, and we see menstrual education as just an entry point for a larger program. So a lot of sexual and reproductive health programs talk about how they have menstrual health as a component, but we really see it as the starting point for a conversation about lots of different sexual and reproductive health issues. So for example, if you start teaching a girl about menstrual health, it will sort of automatically lead to other conversations about their health. So we start with menstruation, and we talk about reproductive tract health, like yeast infections and things like that. it very fluidly leads into that. It also leads into discussions about gender-based violence, especially about transactional sex, because there's a lot of women and young girls in Kenya who are using transactional sex to get menstrual products. It easily leads into conversations about pregnancy and contraceptives. And so instead of having an SRH program that just includes menstrual health, we sort of see it as the center for a conversation that expands beyond that. We also see it as a conversation that's not just with girls, but with lots of different stakeholders. So we don't just educate girls, we educate boys as well. We educate girls who are in school and out of school, because those populations are really in need of this information especially. And then we also work with teachers to make sure they have a good information about sexual and reproductive health, including menstrual health. And community leaders are really important, especially if we're going to talk about breaking down stigma, because it really starts with that leadership, it starts with parents, it starts with teachers, and so covering all of those bases is how we're going to sort of relieve the stigma around menstruation and make sure everyone has the information that they need. So it's not just about the product, this is the entry point, and then that leads us to a lot of different educational components.
Laura. So you asked about major policy initiatives, and period equity is just launched a big project on Wednesday, and it's up on the screen. It's called the Tampon Tax Protest. And period equity, this sort of brings me back to the way I got involved in this work, which was 30 years ago, by apparently being one of the very few people ever to look at their receipt. When you go to a store and buy a box of tampons and a chapstick, I don't know why, but I looked at my receipt and saw that I was paying tax on the tampons and not on the chapstick. And I was a law student here at Columbia, and I looked up the law, and it was unconstitutional then, and the tampon tax is unconstitutional now, and there's a sales tax that's levied now in only 33 of the 50 states. When we brought a lawsuit in 2016 against New York, there were 40 states, and period equity started from that New York lawsuit, and I contacted Jennifer Weiss-Wolf, who a lot of you know, and she was writing publicly about what she termed menstrual equity, and then later wrote a book about it. She's my partner, period equity. So the tampon tax protest is going on now, and you can access information about how to get involved, which would involve buying period products from one of these 33 states right now. So if you're traveling and want to do that, you can download forms, and we're in the middle of a year-long campaign to pressure these remaining 33 states to get rid of their tax. We put them on notice that they have until tax day, 2020, April 15th. And we've got about, I think now 50 pro bono attorneys working with us, and a whole slew of law students, thanks to Marcy and Margaret and a lot of other people who connected us with some very passionate advocates. Yeah.
So that's a lot to chew on. Incredibly impressive and diverse, right? Lots of different interventions, engaging different stakeholders, different people in different social locations, and certainly different approaches and strategies. So that's the hard part. I asked each of our panelists to think about a challenge that they are facing or faced while they did the work. So we're not writing chicken soup for the soul here. I really wanted to get real about the kinds of obstacles that exist in doing this work. So we'll go in the same order, and we started with you, Marcy, the challenge.
This was also really hard for me as a law professor who's used to issue spotting all sorts of problems. And so when I went back and thought about the various hats I wear, I decided to focus on the challenge that we had in terms of implementing a law we were able to get passed in DC. And DC now has an implemented tampon tax repeal law, but the challenge in doing public policy effectively is admitting that it's never enough, right? You don't ever get everything you want. We didn't get a comprehensive solution. We had to make the choice to go forward on a piecemeal basis. Our coalition had to make hard choices about who we were willing to piss off and not piss off, and who we had to befriend. And the reality is laws are symbolic unless they're enforced. And so when you look at all of the challenges, that's really like 7 challenges in one, so you that. But it's true, right? So when I came into this work in the fall of 2016, when Roz became a client of my clinic, there was a tampon tax repeal bill pending, and there were access bills to improve the ability of girls in DC schools and women, girls, and others in the shelters and correctional facilities to have products. And the choice was made to go for the tax first as a gateway to get to other legislation. But the reality is we used our bite at the apple with the tax. It's going to be a while before we get to any of the other access stuff. And as optimistic as I can be, and I can smile a lot, I can be pretty optimistic. It's going to be a while, even in a place like DC, to get things, because it wasn't a one-shot approach like happened in New York City, right? Of getting 3 for 1. We had to make the choice when in DC you have to fund bills that have a fiscal impact within 2 years where the law gets removed. We failed to get any funding for this after the first year that we had it implemented. So we had this beautiful success of getting the law funded in the 51st state, or getting the law passed in the 51st state. But then it didn't get funded for the next year, so it's like we didn't do anything. But people could still talk about the district, but there's nothing actually to talk about because it didn't go into effect. The next year, we were working on funding. We had to make the choice: were we willing to go forward with just funding the repeal on the menstrual products and putting on hold the diapers, right, both adult and baby diapers, because that was more expensive than the menstrual products. And we decided as a community, mostly, right, yes, to go forward with that so we didn't lose the law. And now, the next year, right, we got the diapers put in. And so now the entire law is funded. But that was a multi-year effort. And it upset some people, and we took our bite at the apple by putting the Band-Aid on getting like full and complete comprehensive access to menstrual products in a way that will help the most vulnerable residents and all menstruators in DC. That's the challenge.
That's a great illustration of how an activist is a consummate bargainer, often with her herself, right? You have to make those strategic choices. So, Vanessa.
I mentioned earlier that it was in grad school that the idea came, but it was also in grad school that I was told Procter & Gamble will crush you by the judges. And at that point, I said, okay, I understood the system, I understood the ecosystem of feminine hygiene, but I knew that menstrual health was barely touched product-wise or educational-wise or as far as mainstream was concerned. Then I found myself in Silicon Valley, because that's where I was studying, running into at panels and workshops for startups and for startups for women and for startups for women of color, running into the same types of comments, being told, okay, you're a woman, you're a black woman, and you're a black woman talking about periods, you're better off, and I quote, putting together a WhatsApp group and see where that takes you. I come back to New York and I'm pitching for $10,000 as well as mentorship to be trained at an accelerator, brand new. They said what they were looking for: new innovation, diversity, real social impact solving. I checked off, all of those boxes. I get there and I'm told, you may want to just stay in your lane. And I quote, you should do the dollar pad club, like the Dollar Shave Club, leave the whole tech thing out of it. So they're not really challenges. Really, it's opportunities of letting me know exactly what's out there as far as on the for-profit side, what's out there as far as the innovation side, what's out there as far as those that support innovation for women's health. And that's basically what I've been doing for the past year and a half, was finding everyone, as many people as I could, that was in the space, who understood the space, who are strategically aligned in the space, so that as I am building and as I am engaging, I have a support system and I have a foundation to go off of, because when you have such strong shame, stigma, and taboo still associated with the oldest, most biological function on Earth, it can be disheartening and it can be overwhelming. But if you are strategic with who you align yourself with, this is what I'm learning from those challenges. It becomes easier and easier every day. So.
And we really appreciate how you not only refuse to stay in your lane, but you kind of want to tear down the whole road and build a new one, which is really awesome. Caitlin.
That actually is a perfect segue into one of the challenges I wanted to talk about. So as we're looking at the issue of menstruation-related issues, and with stigma and the cultural restrictions that you see in basically every culture around the world, one of the key problems that we kept coming up when we were looking at this idea of monitoring and measuring progress for this is that these issues are really complex and they have so many factors that feed into them. And so most interventions have so many components of them that measuring them is actually really complicated. And I think that there is a pressure to distill it down into one soundbite. So we've seen a couple of times today kind of those zombie figures or the pressure to use absenteeism. I know that when I worked at an implementer, I heard so many times from my donor, they were like, well, how many girls are we going to save? How many girls won't drop out because of this program? I was like, well, we can't give you that. And so I think we struggled a lot as we were thinking about measurement and what indicators do we have and should we be working towards, and how do we create something that really captures the complexity of what these policies and interventions are going to do. So like, how do we measure that in general, but also how do we create measures that capture that complexity, but also give donors and investors that something close to a soundbite that they're looking for. And then also just there's still lots of gaps in the evidence. So for this meeting, we focused on measurements looking at menstruation-related policies and programs for girls, and largely girls in the global south, mostly because right now that's where most of the interventions and programs have happened. So there were the most measures to dig into, but it's definitely a limitation of that work.
I mean, isn't that a great illustration of that sort of almost desperate cha-cha-cha between producing something that resonates with funders without losing the necessary nuance that just really reflects the reality of menstruator lives and needs. Thanks. Okay, Emily.
So that actually meshes really well with what I wanted to
We
say.
actually are not coordinated as well as you might think. I gotta be clear about that.
So I recently returned to graduate school. I'm a student at Mailman, and one of the main reasons I returned to school was because of sort of this gap in communication and understanding between researchers and implementers on the ground, which I don't think is unique to menstrual health at all, but it's where I have the most experience. And so it was interesting working in Kenya for a few years with our implementers and seeing some of the frustrations that came about. Like, they talk to girls every day. We do baseline and endline surveys that show us that these girls need our products, need the education. But for a lot of funders and a lot of partners, that data and those stories aren't enough to prove that what we're doing is worthwhile and to prove that that we should receive their funding. So just sort of the gap of researcher as an implementer is really frustrating, but then also not having the power to sort of influence the funding and the research that is happening, and not even really having a connection with researchers anywhere that are researching this topic. And then also I think that there's sort of a miscommunication the other way. So when you're a researcher, you have to sort of, like you said, focus on one specific thing. Like, is this pad helping someone? Is this specific educational session helping someone? But like I said, our programs are very comprehensive and they include a lot of things, and we think that's important. So extrapolating what the researchers are finding and implementing that on the ground is really difficult. And often the language we use isn't the same, so there's a lot of misunderstanding. A lot of the resources that researchers use to implement projects during their research projects aren't really available to implementers, so it's hard to track down those resources. And then I think underlying all of it is just a lack of funding for research to support what the implementers are doing on the ground.
So over and over again, we see this broken bridge between implementers and researchers. Sometimes constrained by ego, sometimes constrained by different discourses, always constrained by funding. Yeah, thank you. Laura.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for asking us to keep this lively and real, because these are real answers to challenges. And you know, I mentioned that it was 30 years ago when I was a law student, and I looked at my receipt, and I did research about the tampon tax, and years later, when I tried to get people interested, and no one was interested, I got advice from the best lawyer I know and most effective advocate and activist, and he said, you want to see who's out in front on this issue, and you want to contact them. You can't just file a lawsuit. You've got to work with people who've put in the time on this, and work with them and work to support them. And that was great advice. I called up Jennifer Weiss-Wolf, cold call, because she was, people were sending me articles she had written in the New York Times, and I knew that she would know what's going on, and of course she is that kind of person as well. So the challenge is convincing other people to do that too. And you know, Period Equity is now working with this whole coalition, and it's really kind of great about lawyers working on this, thinking that like only the legal stuff matters. Is you know, they are essential to getting this done, but then you also talk to activists, and they've been working for years talking to legislators think that they're essential. Everybody's essential. That's why this is so hard. But you know, the challenge is making sure that people understand that they're one essential piece of something larger. But I think we're doing it.
Terrific. So the third and final question I pose to our panelists is this. What did you wish you'd known before you did this work? So I wanted to inspire them to speak to those among us who can potentially learn from their foibles as well as their successes. What is it that they wish they'd known before they embarked on their work? How can they save us, spare us some of the challenges along the way? Okay, so same procedure, we'll start with Marcy.
So I'd like to just say yes. I wish I knew yes and all of the challenges that were just talked about in the last round. Right, so when you were talking about the gap in bridges of researchers and implementers, I would say yes, and policymakers who also don't understand either of those worlds and have their own language that doesn't intersect with the language that are used either by people on the ground or by researchers, and don't have different timelines. And so I wish I had actually thought strategically about how to address some of that. And honestly, I just wish I had known more about this world that you all are a part of here, and I just learned about, because my students now and our client, we're just recreating the wheels over since become friends and collaborators and sharers of all sorts of really helpful information. Right? I've known Margaret Johnson for a really long time. We didn't realize that we were both working on this literally like down the street from each other on neighboring campaigns, and we talked, right? And so we just hadn't thought to talk about periods or the work that we were doing. And so we just constantly, like, we're making the case ourselves. And now that I know about this research and these campaigns and the beautiful website that was on there and might still be out there, I just think how much time we could have saved to then move on to that next level of, in my case, advocacy, or helping translate the research that many of you in this room are doing to bring it into the public policy arena to make policy change. I wish I could all of you.
But now you do.
Yes.
Thanks, Marcy. Vanessa, what do you wish you know?
I wish I had known that I was going to get fired before I got fired, because that's what ultimately, propelled me into going into where I am now. It took me getting fired. But as far as this advocacy, being a badge entrepreneur,
Say that again.
love it. As far as this advocacy and being a badge entrepreneur, I really wish I would have been a bit more brave earlier. It was 10 years of me hiding in shame, stigma, and taboo. As well as doing the research. I was researching and I was documenting what was going on with me, but I was still so ashamed, going to work every day, not feeling well. The days that I was supposed to be out, I wouldn't be out. I worked for a big brand at the time, and I just wish I had started earlier. Now, again, the land is vast and open. Why? Because it's the first time we've been paying attention since Eve. Literally, $1 billion in the past 3 years, overnight. So, and everything that we're talking about up here on the table, and people who have been on the ground from 30 and 40 and 50 years ago coming into the light, yeah, it's wide open, and I'm excited, but I still wish that I had been more brave, but I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'm brave now. So if I had to say anything, and everyone in this room, speak up and use your voice, because I'm claiming to want to give voice to voiceless when I was pretty choked myself. So.
Caitlin.
So I think that a lesson that I kind of relearned through this work is just how much education and awareness raising is still needed around this space. So even I've been working this for a number of years, and I think that in part I have forgotten how much people, we're kind of in a little bit of an echo chamber, because within, we all understand why this is so important. On Twitter, everyone I talk to understands this issue. But when a lot of the experts that we brought together in this measurement meeting are brilliant humans, who work in psychosocial health or work in education, and they're smarter than I could ever hope to be, but we still had to spend almost the first day and a half of the meeting going through, like, these are all the reasons that this is important, these are all the areas of life that this impacts, this is all of the ways that this is relevant for what you're doing here, and I think that that's just a really valuable lesson, to continually remember that we have to build that foundation with everyone across all of these different sectors, because what has become second nature and really common knowledge to us isn't still in a lot of the development sector.
Emily.
So, I do wish I would have known about all of you before starting this, though it was 10 years ago, so I'm not sure how many people would have been there. But I wish I just would have known about the landscape that is menstrual health, because it's so multi-sectoral that there are so many people involved. It's hard to navigate, and it's hard to know who you're missing. And so coming down from that, as an organization, we've had to learn how to sort of focus in a certain area, but also be open to partnerships with other areas. So one good example of this is when we first started, we sort of saw ourselves as a grassroots organization. We're going to work with local communities, only work with them and talk to local government, but that's the only policymakers we'll work with. Because talking to policymakers is too messy, it's hard to do. But since then, we've learned that that's not the best approach. So Hoover is both working on the grassroots level, as I explained, but also working closely with policymakers in Kenya. And the reason we were sort of forced into that is because there's no standard for a reusable pad in Kenya. And so we've still haven't won, but we've had to fight to get a standard for a reusable product in Kenya. And so that has made us sort of have to work with policymakers, but in doing that, we've also started working on working groups with the Kenyan government, and we've actually gotten to contribute to the most recent menstrual health policy that the Kenyan government is coming out with, and also the curriculum that they're creating for teachers in all of the schools. Kenya also has a program where they distribute pads to all schoolgirls. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's been really important to be part of those larger conversations because I think both things are needed to essentially impact the girls and women that we're working with. So just understanding the landscape and then understanding the best places to work within that landscape, which I think is echoing a lot of what you said.
Thanks. And Laura, what do you wish you know?
I'm going to say the same thing that I've heard, which is about this community. This conference is really so important, just establishing that we are all working together. Just as an anecdote, because we were coming to menstrual equity from different disciplines and professions, and then I met a couple law professors, Bridget Crawford, who wrote an article about the unconstitutionality of the tampon tax, and I know several of you are writing some more stuff, but we are taking those articles as they're published and getting lawyers and using those arguments, hopefully, in lawsuits. So, and also in the other work that I do with period equity, which is around safety of menstrual products, we are reaching out to researchers and, all of these studies I mentioned earlier that there's an economist who's just an abstract I saw come online, I contacted him, so that there are so many people working on this. It's good to know now, and it's good to know that, there's a lot more that you will look back and say, darn, I wish I had known that too, but I'm really glad that now we have a community. I mean, we've had a community, but I'm in it.
So the landscape is wide. It's in some ways old. It's wide open, but there are people on it, right? And some structures. And there's also some potholes and some vicious animals, and right? But community, that's become this message. So we have about 15 minutes to engage all of you with the folks up here. Reactions, comments, questions, anecdotes, limericks. What do you got? If you have a limerick, you get to go first. Yeah. And I think it's great to use the microphone so that we can be sensitive to people with hearing impairments.
The pad, the reusable pad. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, so this is the Hoover pad. It's completely made in Nairobi, Kenya, and sourced in Nairobi, Kenya. So there are versions in the US that are available as well. But basically, I think that there's 4 layers. So there's a back layer that's like moisture wicking material, and then the inside layers are sort of toweling and flannel, which absorbs. And then the top layer is like a mesh material just for comfort. And this is probably like the 5th iteration of the pad. We've definitely like used feedback from girls to inform how we make this pad. And we have a production facility in Nairobi where we employ 30 women to make this, and then we also make other sort of women's health products, including school uniforms and underwear as well. So you can come see the pad after this. Anyone can come look at this.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask if I, explain to me exactly what's done with it. I don't.
Like how you use it?
Yeah.
Oh, it's used just like a disposable pad. So you can see, like, it looks like a disposable pad, except you wear it for maybe like 4 hours, and then you put it into a plastic bag until you can get home so that it stays moist. And then when you get home, you soak it for 10 minutes, and then you wash it with soap and let it dry, and then you can use it again. So yeah.
It's what your granny used, but with an upgrade.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Good. It's important to get to the material, to the practical. Other questions, comments, anecdotes, similar stories, challenges, obstacles? You got something? Great.
Hi, so my question is about the pad too. We talked a lot about so many different issues, but we didn't talk about like menstruation and its impact on the environment. And now, like, I feel like because we talk about climate change so much, and it gives me anxiety to think about it. So I'm just wondering, like, is like the lower layer, is it like biodegradable, and then having to put it in the plastic? And also, like, I wish there was more conversation about menstruation and environment. That's all.
Yeah, so when we first started making reusable pads, it wasn't really out of a concern for the environment. It was more because women were using it a lot, and we wanted something that they would already be comfortable using, something similar. But since then, we've joined the conversation, and I really think that reusable products are really important, especially in growing economies where there's more and more people buying menstrual products, and those numbers are growing. We've never tested our product for biodegradability, but it can be used for 3 years. Some girls have used it for 5 years. So just in that sense, it's saving a lot as far as the environment. And so that's how we see ourselves in that space.
Thanks. So I appreciated the conversation about kind of the gaps between policy and research. There was one comment that with research, you can only look at one factor, dive in on one factor. And I think that's actually a real limitation of research, but it doesn't have to be the case. And I think we need to actually improve our own methodology, because this kind of very siloed, reductionist way of doing research is just limiting our application of that. And I'm currently in a training for implementation science, and that's very much about considering context and how you can actually get evidence base into the real world and making it work. And so I just challenge, I challenge us as researchers to come up with better methodologies that kind of embrace complexity, multiple factors, things that interact, rather than just kind of taking reductionist approaches to just one factor and one explanation. That's not really a question, but I just want to...
I'm going to turn it into a question. So I wonder if we could go down the line, and each of you could tell us, what do you need to know to do your work better? Like, if you were going to make an appeal to researchers, what is it that you need to know? So, right? So Emily, we'll just go down the line. Emily, what is the research question that you're dying to answer?
I would like to know what education and other programs help reduce stigma, because I think that's really an underlying issue with everything.
I'd like to know how periods are impacted at work and people's actual absenteeism and people's access to breaks, whether they, if any, whether they have access to water and disposable places to dispose blood, if any, and really anything about
would love to know all of the ingredients that are currently in the popular mainstream sanitary pads.
Yeah, I'll second that, and I would love to know how those ingredients and the chemicals are affecting women's health long term.
I want to know so many things. I would just first echo what Lauren was saying. I think that that was one of the things that we really wrestled with, is that we're seeing all of these interventions and a lot of research as well that are grappling with this complexity and are looking at the complexity. And so part of it was just trying to find, looking at measures that are kind of cross-cutting but still capture complexity. And then in terms of what I would like to know, I think that measures in terms of how do we look at stigma and how do we reduce stigma through menstrual programming is really interesting. And also how do we capture, so looking at particularly the experiences of girls in schools, how do we capture the experience of menstruation and how that affects them? So looking beyond absenteeism, or like, are they in school or are they not, like that binary, how do we capture kind of all of those layers of complexity about the way menstrual experiences in school affect schooling experiences?
So anybody looking for a dissertation topic, we've got five dissertation topics in the offing. Other comments, questions?
Hi, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the free.
Almost like the ice cream cup.
Thank you for a brilliant conference. It's been truly groundbreaking. I would like to add the comment that next year I strongly suggest you have a whole section on menopause, and that I will discuss my own experiences. And then in the interim, everybody take your cell phone and give it to their mother or grandmother and have them personally discuss their own menopausal symptoms and try to, I could try to string it all together as myths and potential reality. Again, I'm Dr. Mildred Holder, former retired Barnard professor. Thank you very much.
I always appreciate your commercial for paying more attention to menopause. Absolutely, thank you. And perimenopause. I think we've got time for one more. All right.
I'd like to say one other thing. The reason that everybody got so sick here is as long as Steve's on, so is because I'm still menopause. Always hot.
Yeah, me too. I'm always hot too. This is a very hot building, right? So perhaps in the interest of wrapping up, I'd like to go down the line and invite you to respond to this. What is the takeaway you want people to, what is your takeaway message for us? What do you want us to walk out of the store today thinking about that maybe we didn't think about when we walked in the door? So based on your expertise, right, as practice, policy, and programming experts, what is the big takeaway? What's the message you want us to be thinking about throughout the weekend and the holiday weekend, around the Thanksgiving table, if you do that, right? Okay.
I would just say that we can learn a lot from each other about menstruation, about menstrual experiences, and that doesn't just go from the global north to the global south. I think a lot of really amazing work has been done as far as menstrual health in the global south, and we can actually learn from what's being done there and apply it to some things that are being done in the US and the global north. Amen. Thank you.
How you would tell the story of your own experiences, your research, and the experiences of presenting your research and getting feedback on your research, and the stories of your communities around menstruation in plain English, so that you can help build the case for thoughtful public policy that supports the removal of the financial burdens on purchasing products, but also that goes beyond. So the storytelling component of your work, I think, is so important. And then connect it with everyone else's by continuing the conversation.
I challenge you all to think of your own bodies. Like Marcy said, your very first experience, was it traumatic? Was it supportive? Was it long? Was it short? and know that every single last one of us has a different experience. We're not all one size fits all. There's no one period that's the same for everyone. Think about, when it comes to women's health, which we have barely touched, but we're touching, what that means to be an individual in women's health and how diverse and varied it may be.
I'll just be repetitive, but the power of the cold call. And you're all working on interesting projects that we might not know about, but I think if we just do a little online research to see how it's relevant and how it can push policy to respond to people's lives in a better way, then find us and make the call.
And I think my final point would just be the importance of sharing our work across programming and research outside of our kind of menstrual circles and making sure to engage with colleagues that work in complementary and similar areas, both to get their expertise and their ideas when they think about these issues in different ways, and also to continue to share the importance of this topic that we know is so cross-cutting.
So I'll just say in conclusion, I recently watched the documentary about Toni Morrison. It's on Netflix, check it out. And in it, she's ruminating on her capacity as a social change agent. Obviously, this was done before her death. And she said, I had to think to myself, I can't do everything. I'm not an expert in everything. I don't have the power, I don't have the resources to make the change that really needs to happen in the world, but I do have some power. She said, I had to think to myself, what can I do where I am now? What can I do where I am now? And I think that's really helpful. So think about that. What can you do where you are now? Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to all of you. I mean, what a day.